recollecting the peroration of a speech on the purifying influences of American democracy and their destined spread over the world, made by a certain eloquent senator, for whose vote in the Senate a railway company to which my two brothers belonged had just paid $20,000. I wound up by repeating its glowing predictions of the magnificent future that smiled upon mankind, when the flag of freedom should float over an entire continent, and 200 millions of intelligent citizens, accustomed from infancy to the daily use of revolvers, should apply to a cowering universe the doctrine of the patriot Monroe. When I had concluded, my host gently shook his head and fell into a musing study, making a sign to me and his daughter to remain silent while he reflected. And after a time he said, in a very earnest and solemn tone, "If you think as you say that you, though a stranger, have received kindness at the hands of me and mine, I adjure you to reveal nothing to any other of our people respecting the world from which you came, unless on consideration I give you permission to do so. Do you consent to this request?" "Of course, I pledge my word to it," said I, somewhat amazed, and I extended my right hand to grasp his. But he placed my hand gently on his forehead, and his own right hand on my breast, which is the custom amongst this race in all matters of promise or verbal obligations. Then turning to his daughter, he said, "And you, Z, will not repeat to anyone what the stranger has said, or may say, to me or to you, of a world other than our own." Z rose and kissed her father on the temple, saying, with a smile, "A geese tongue is wanton, but love can fetter it fast. And if, my father, you fear lest a chance word from me or yourself could expose our community to danger by a desire to explore a world beyond us, will not a wave of the vril, properly impelled, wash even the memory of what we have heard the stranger say out of the tablets of the brain?" "What is the vril?" I asked. Therewith Z began to enter into an explanation of which I understood very little, for there is no word in any language I know which is an exact synonym for vril. I should call it electricity, except that it comprehends in its manifold branches other forces of nature, to which in our scientific nomenclature differing names are assigned, such as magnetism, galvanism, etc. These people consider that in vril they have arrived at the unity in natural energetic agencies, which has been conjectured by many philosophers above ground, and which Faraday thus intimates under the more cautious term of correlation. "I have long held an opinion," says that illustrious experimentalist, "almost amounting to a conviction, in common, I believe, with many other lovers of natural knowledge, that the various forms under which the forces of matter are made manifest have one common origin, or, in other words, are so directly related and mutually dependent that they are convertible, as it were, into one another, and possess equivalents of power in their action. These subterranean philosophers assert that by one operation of vril, which Faraday would perhaps call atmospheric magnetism, they can influence the variations of temperature, in plain words, the weather; that by operations akin to those ascribed in mesmerism, electrobiology, odic force, etc., but applied scientifically through vril conductors, they can exercise influence over minds and bodies, animal and vegetable, to an extent not surpassed in the romances of our mystics. To all such agencies they give the common name of vril. Z asked me if, in my world, it was not known that all the faculties of the mind could be quickened to a degree unknown in the waking state by trance or vision, in which the thoughts of one brain could be transmitted to another, and knowledge be thus rapidly interchanged. I replied that there were amongst us stories told of such trance or vision, and that I had heard much and seen something in mesmeric clairvoyance, but that these practices had fallen much into disuse or contempt, partly because of the gross impostures to which they had been made subservient, and partly because, even where the effects upon certain abnormal constitutions were genuinely produced, the effects, when fairly examined and analysed, were very unsatisfactory, not to be relied upon for any systematic truthfulness or any practical purpose, and rendered very mischievous to credulous persons by the superstitions they tended to produce. Z received my answers with much benignant attention, and said that similar instances of abuse and credulity had been familiar to their own scientific experience in the infancy of their knowledge and while the properties of vril were misapprehended, but that she reserved further discussion on this subject till I was more fitted to enter into it. She contented herself with adding that it was through the agency of vril, while I had been placed in the state of trance, that I had been made acquainted with the rudiments of their language, and that she and her father, who alone of the family took the pains to watch the experiment, had acquired a greater proportionate knowledge of my language than I of their own, partly because my language was much simpler than theirs, comprising far less of complex ideas, and partly because their organisation was, by hereditary culture, much more ductile and more readily capable of acquiring knowledge than mine. At this I secretly demurred, and having had, in the course of a practical life, to sharpen my wits whether at home or in travel, I could not allow that my cerebral organisation could possibly be duller than that of people who had lived all their lives by lamplight. However, while I was thus thinking, Z quietly pointed her forefinger at my forehead and sent me to sleep. Chapter 8. When I once more awoke, I saw by my bedside the child who had brought the rope and grappling hooks to the house in which I had been first received, and which, as I afterwards learned, was the residence of the chief magistrate of the tribe. The child, whose name was Taee, was the magistrate's eldest son. I found that during my last sleep or trance I had made still greater advance in the language of the country, and could converse with comparative ease and fluency. This child was singularly handsome, even for the beautiful race to which he belonged, with a countenance very manly in aspect for his years, and with a more vivacious and energetic expression than I had hitherto seen in the serene and passionless faces of the men. He brought me the tablet on which I had drawn the mode of my descent, and had also sketched the head of the horrible reptile that had scared me from my friend's corpse. Pointing to that part of the drawing, Taee put to me a few questions respecting the size and form of the monster, and the cave or chasm from which it had emerged. His interest in my answers seemed so grave as to divert him for a while from any curiosity as to myself or my antecedents. But to my great embarrassment, seeing how I was pledged to my host, he was just beginning to ask me where I came from, when Z fortunately entered, and overhearing him, said, "Taee, give to our guest any information he may desire, but ask none from him in return. To question him who he is, whence he comes, or wherefore he is here, would be a breach of the law which my father has laid down in this house." "So be it," said Taee, pressing his hand to his breast. And from that moment till the one in which I saw him last, this